Hello and welcome to the Women's in Automotive Network. My name is Nicole Scott and I'll be your host today. I will be the interrogator and inquisitive mind talking with Katharina from Bosch. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to dive into our chat, which we're going to talk about the business world, agile business, and an AI-driven future. So how are you doing today, Katharina?
Thank you very much for the invitation, Nicole. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation. I'm doing good. It's a hot summertime today here in Germany where I'm located. And so I'm very much looking forward to the next time now with you.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm sitting in Berlin as well, and it's quite a warm day. So why don't we get started with just telling me a little bit about your position at Bosch, because I think Bosch is such a big company. I mean, I think Bosch products are sold in every country in the world. The range goes from home appliances to digital services. And everything kind of in between. So can you talk about your focus within the Bosch kind of conglomerate?
Yes, for sure. So Bosch overall has indeed more than 400,000 associates worldwide. And our founder, Robert Bosch, very quickly went abroad. This is why we're actually located in many of the locations in the world. And as you said, our portfolio is mainly still automotive and automotive related, but also a lot about home appliances, about power tools, about heating technologies, service technologies, so all around. And my home is Bosch Digital. This is a unit that goes across all the different business divisions. We're about 12,000 people worldwide. And we're taking care of the IT and the digital services for the global Bosch company. And my particular responsibility is for all of the automotive, or how we call it, mobility solutions sector, meaning that everything that goes into the typical automotive OE business going to that. And I'm responsible there for the customer interface, meaning we're discussing directly with our divisions what they need, how we can support them, how we can drive the digitalization together with them. And I'm also operatively and strategically responsible for driving all of the solutions, so everything that we build and design, particularly for the automotive business.
Amazing. So now, how does it actually work within the organization? Because I know I was actually just in Korea visiting LG, and the conglomerate system actually works quite differently there than it does in a lot of different regions. So when I was talking to their mobility division, they said that they went shopping in all the different areas within the company to kind of pull it together. So now when you're kind of within your solution and you're kind of reaching out, how do you ensure that you're grabbing all the solutions, or like interfacing with all of the right teams and gaining all of the right knowledge from all the different areas? I mean, I'm always so amazed by how much knowledge exists within these companies and how people are able to distill that down and discover it and find it and then make it applicable. So how exactly does that kind of like ensuring that you're able to communicate, well within the business and making sure that you're not missing any innovation that's happening somewhere along the lines?
To be very frank, it's impossible not to miss anything, right? At that kind of scope and size, you have to have a little bit of trust in the process that you have the right network, if you have processes in place. And also, I think, with that big part, and also with, as you mentioned earlier, with that regional spread, I don't think everything is relevant for everybody at the same time. So it's also sometimes what people are, like you said, in Korea are doing might be just relevant for Korea. But so we always encourage people to speak up about it. We have a couple of internal platforms that we have kind of an internal Facebook where you could share all the kind of story. Then, of course, we have more formal meetings where we would also share and give different people a voice and different positions a voice, also where we allow them to enter the stage on their own, like, proactiveness. And I think proactiveness, this is really what is so important in big companies and big enterprises like that you proactively speak up, that you think about who could benefit from my solution, who else would be happy if he or she had this know-how. So this attitude of speaking out is really quite important in an organization to get heard and seen. And other than that, I think it's also a lot about relationships, right? To build these relationships, to understand who you have to work closely together with. Of course, there are processes in place, but especially at these highly dynamic times we're all in, to only rely on processes will be very difficult. and many of these processes get obsolete as we go, right? So it's really being able to manage this with a lot of personal network, but also technical tools, how to make sure we can connect to each other. And I think that combination helps us to stay on top of things.
I think that that's interesting that you bring up personal relationships, because I think that you're right. Like, I think that this is one of the key things that does drive a lot of business forward. Knowing who to, ask the question to is sometimes. Hello?
Hi, I can hear you again, yeah?
Hi, sorry about that. Oh, perfect. Sorry, I had a little glitch in my screen. So I was just saying that I think it's really interesting that you bring up personal relationships, and this being key in kind of, or not being key, but one of the more interesting ways how you make sure that nothing is missed. Because there are a lot of different ways that businesses can, tackle this issue of making sure that innovation is seen and driven forward. And there's a lot of different agile frameworks that businesses can decide to use, and different practices that they can try to implement. So in your experience in your team, do you have any success stories or like interesting agile practice frameworks that have worked particularly well for you in such a large organization?
Of course, we're using, for example, in the engineering context, we're using SAFe and other methods. We are also using the Scrum method, and I think these are very well known and applied for where applicable. I think this is really important, that I'm really very much against to scream out loud that it's only agile that we need. I think we really need to make adjustments and to see where we have projects and processes that really require that agile method. And I think there is quite a lot, so I fully agree to this. But I think we should not be dogmatic about it, and also really look closely where maybe still some waterfall projects or approaches are legitimate. I think one of the biggest things where we've applied an agile framework is we've turned Bosch Digital from January onwards in a true agile organization. And this has been a tremendous effort that has been taken. We have had 2 transformations before that basically paved the way towards that evolvement and towards an agile organization. And I just can tell from our organizational perspective, it helps us dramatically, because it allows us to be much closer with customers. It allows us to really also try out ideas in a much quicker cycle and sprint. It forces us to think much more customer-oriented and outcome-oriented, which sometimes for IT can be quite difficult to define what is really the outcome of what you're doing, because a lot of times it's talking about output. So this is for us really a game changer. Are we still growing into it? Yes. I mean, it's just now the 8th month that we're doing this, and it's still a lot of effort because it requires really a different thinking from everyone. And of course, we're still doing sometimes 2 steps forwards and 1 backwards. But I think this is normal, These transformations take time. You just cannot change everything overnight. But to me, I'm a big fan of it, and I really love working in this agile, more dynamic setup. So to me, this is one of the biggest agile frameworks that I'm experiencing now. How we're working on that.
And so how is it working with your customers? Because I know the automotive industry is at, very different stages of digitalization, and a lot of companies are working at very different paces with how they've implemented it within their supply chain, within their digital services. I mean, like, you're dealing with a gambit of, legacy companies and new movers. So how are you able to kind of scale the way that you work with your customers in their various stages of their digital development?
Well, I think this agile framework exactly allows for that, right? We would say that we, to a couple of our customers, of our internal customers, who are on the one hand just the IT suppliers, where it's still very much of an old world. In a couple of them, we're very close to being transformation partners to drive the digital transformation with them. And I think our task is to be ready for both, right? To be ready for the step up as soon as we're developing ourselves toward for it. I think that the big advantage of this is that I personally have experience from outside automotive, which helps me quite a lot, because automotive in general, I would say, is an industry that was not on the digital forefront. I think if you look into the banking sector, if you look into the consumer goods sector, I think there are other, well, let me put it this way, or also the mobility sector in a broader sense when it comes to energy, when it comes to urban mobility. I think there are really things where we see much more digital services and much more digital transformation, where the automotive industry is a little bit more lagging behind for good reason. I mean, you don't want to, there are certain areas where you can experiment more, but when it comes to cars or commercial vehicles that have to be absolutely security proof on a highway running 200 kilometers an hour, you don't want to make too much experiments. You really want to make sure that this is a super reliable thing. So I think this is one thing, how to prepare yourself for it, right? And to be skilled up to that level, to be in your mindset up to that level, and to take it in a small step forward. Second, I really think a global setup helps dramatically, because there's that funny, or not funny, but there's that saying about China speed. And I think China is one of the regions at the moment where everybody's looking to, where they're going full speed ahead, questioning the definition of what used to be impossible, if it's really impossible or if it just cannot be done, questioning a couple of paradigms that were existing in the industry. So I think this is also something that helps to bring in a regional perspective and a different perspective. And in general, I think this diversity of perspective may come from different cultures, different region, different gender, whatever it is. I think this really helps to be ready for that kind of change, coupled with a little bit of just a little bit paranoia to realize that you will never be fully on top of things. And I think once you have this paranoia or this humbleness, that makes you open and makes you curious to learn more. So I think this is one of these essential ingredients, how to stay open for that development, and also to be capable of tackling different speeds at a time.
You know, it's when you were talking, I was really thinking about how, you know, we've been watching companies deploy agile frameworks in businesses for over a decade, and I'm always still surprised, but yet not surprised, that there's a resistance, you know, to change, and a resistance to this kind of flexible framework for being so adaptable. And how much do you think, you know, because you mentioned that Bosch has gone through 2 transformations previously. Do you think that just continuously breaking the mold has just made it easier, that when the next transformation comes along, people are just like easier to roll along with it?
Definitely. I would definitely, and I mean, me acting is mainly in the IT environment, you can really, I think it's also a little bit, you cannot compare it to the hardcore engineering of an automotive, because of an automotive business doing, because the IT people are very much, they know that they have to learn. They know that they have to upskill on a regular basis, right? Even in systems that have a long life cycle, right? For example, the SAP, the ERP enterprise systems of SAP that are there for quite a long time, but also shorter cycles than others. So IT people very much know, it's in their genes or in their mindset, that they need to upskill on a regular basis. So they are quite aware that there is change, that there will always be change, and change is good because it means literally upskilling, taking you to the next level. I think when you're coming into that hardware, I think it's a different thinking, because as mentioned before, you don't want to have too much experiments with a gear. It must work under all circumstances. And also here we have the investment cycles that are just much more longer, that are much more intensive. So I think we're coming out of an industry that is used to work in 7-year platform cycles. And now you're telling them your development time must be cut by half because your competitors are much faster. So I think it takes a while to accustom to that. And I think, you know, one of my favorite quotes is something Mark Twain said. He said, "You cannot throw old habits out of the window. You have to coax them down the stairs, step by step." And I think this is so true. You cannot enforce people to say, and now you think different from tomorrow onwards. You have to do it in different ways. You have to lead by example. You have to question your own beliefs. You have to highlight the ones that are willing, and to also show people what is possible. You have to be honest and also listen to people what's not possible. You have to guide people very closely to help them in that transformation. So I think it's not easy. And I think we should be very careful in making judgments about good and bad, old and new, possible and impossible. So I think, in my point of view, we should rather, if you really want to transform successfully, you don't reach that by telling people they're old school, they don't get it, and it has never been like that. but you rather must look into the assets that people are having, the competences people are having, and building with them a story on the way forward, how we can all use the competencies that they've gained in future in that new setup. And so to me, very often a majority of competencies can be carried forward, right? Nobody has to start from zero. I have to completely unlearn everything he or she did in the past.
So with AI coming in very kind of hot in the hype cycle in the last year, this is nothing new for Bosch, actually. I think it was 5 years ago where your CEO said that AI is going to touch every part of the business, doesn't matter what it is. And this has been something that Bosch has been working towards for quite some time. But the hype around AI in the last 15 months is unlike anything that we've seen before, right? And so how are you dealing with this new hype cycle of AI that's kind of emerged in the last year and a half, and how are you implementing that into the business? You know, considering the fact that you've been working on this for quite some time, so it's not new, but it feels new with the way that everyone is talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, in the last, as you said, 18 months or so, I think AI really became tangible for the masses. I think before that, there was a lot of this, especially in Germany, the German data angst, right? Everybody is like, what are they going to do with data? I'm going to be transparent now. Where's that going? And it was, a lot of it was irrational, but, you know, angst usually is irrational. That's the nature of angst. So there was a lot of that discussion. Of course, we applied it already in process automation, in forecasting, in the manufacturing field, in picture detection, you name it. So I think we had a lot of use cases, focused also a lot of optimizing our own processes and also looking into how can we get better. With the whole topic about generative AI and being it's so easy to use with natural language that you didn't have to be a coder anymore, but you could really easily extract things. A whole lot of use cases came up because nobody of us really needs to have specific skills to use ChatGPT, right? Or similar approaches. Of course, it helps if you have some prompting experience, but honestly speaking, if you spend I don't know, a couple of hours on prompting, you automatically learn and will get better. So again, this is not rocket science. Then you read a couple of books. There are thousands of YouTube videos out there. So skilling yourself up has never been that easy without being any technical expert. And I think this is at the moment the secret sauce why it hit the masses. And I think the advantages are so obvious. So, and we're using it really now on all different kinds. From on the one hand, for example, our marketing and communication people are using it. For example, what we do, we've just seen an example where we translate product videos where we introduce new products like a new drill driver. We can use that now in every language with an AI that can easily transfer also how your lips are moving. You can do it like that. You save really hundreds, thousands of translation costs. The second thing is you can create social media campaigns easily with a picture generation, right? Third, but then looking more into the technical area, especially for the area of autonomous driving, you know that there's a lot of data that is required and a lot of pictures to train that algorithm. And here we also use AI to actually generate these pictures to help that, especially for so-called edge cases that don't happen very often, where you have to drive around a lot with a car to actually meet these kind of cases. But also in more for our own processes, for example, to review the contracts we have as Bosch with our outside customers to see, okay, where do we have which delivery obligations? And due to the global setup, you can imagine that we maybe have a frame contract, but then there are various, literally hundreds of smaller contracts in between. So really to keep an overview on that. Or also what I love is I've just been with the teams in India last week, and they showed me how we have like extensive documentation, how they created a chatbot that actually is capable of finding failure codes, translating them into their local language so that they understand what that failure code is, plus opening up also an idea how to solve that issue now or that failure. So I really think this search kind of, this intelligent searches also help us. So there's really a whole wide case of AI, and I think it really came out of this zone in the last 18 months where you had to have some specific expert skills and now being you and me and everybody able to use it and to benefit from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it is one of those things where people are either afraid of it or they're embracing it. I mean, there's like the emotions tend to run hot in kind of both directions. But I think like once you kind of push the edges away, the people who are really using it are definitely finding it, very compelling for how to change their business direction very quickly. So we're seeing a lot of startups kind of pivot a lot faster than we had in the past, which I think is especially exciting for automotive, which loves to work with startups that are a lot faster and more agile than big businesses can traditionally be. So when we look at the future of automotive, because this is one of the reasons why I love the mobility sector, is that there's still no clear winners. There's still no, for sure that this will be the outcome. We're still imagining the way that cities will, evolve when we look at, new concepts of mobility. I mean, like, it's just really like everything is possible, and I get really, really excited about it. And then I try to think, but how is AI going to impact that? Like, what will the role of AI be when we look at the future of automotive? Because there's so many ways that it can go, especially when you have like digital at the heart. So when you look at the future, which areas do you think are going to be, really impacted by AI in the next, say, maybe 5 to 10 years? So not like too far, but far enough.
Honestly speaking, I would say let's turn it around and say I could not name you one area where it's not impacted. I'm really serious about it. I think this is for everything we see mobility. It will change the things. We're looking at projects because why? Because everything is about data in our days. Even the hardware is about data, because the hardware needs to be manufactured somewhere. All the machines in the manufacturing space are in our days connected. We have now these supply chain laws, and I don't know the English term of that, where you have this law where you have to dig deeper into your supply chain and prove evident where all of the things are coming from and by which standards they were manufactured. So this is also data then involved. How do you match this data? How do you keep track of that? So we're facing a century where we're flooded with information, with data, and to keep track of this, AI is super important. That also algorithms learn and get smarter, how to search things, how to consolidate things, how to get interpretation out of things. I think this is something huge. And then again, if it's in the communication and marketing area, I think there's very obvious. But also when it comes to autonomous, where we need tons of data, literally tons of data, how to manage that cars will run without a driver. So there I see a huge potential in the training, in the testing, in all of that. But also, as I said, the manufacturing, I think, and also helping to have more productivity to actually make that much faster. So I think I cannot imagine any area that will not be touched by AI in the future.
Yeah, no, you are absolutely right. I mean, we're all worried about job displacement and, the negative side of AI and the way that this is what we're kind of seeing first. You know what I mean? Like, businesses are producing a lot of value from it, but in the media, it's really like a lot of negative examples with what's happening in the world today are the most visible. Right. And so I think sometimes you need to remind yourself of just how positive AI can be, because there are a lot of negative examples out there. And when you look at how you're integrating AI into the business today, are you seeing the most impact within the business itself? So in the organizational structure of how the business is kind of run, maybe within leadership decisions, or like within the framework of the business, or do you see, or you're probably going to say it's all aspects of the business, the consumer facing and internal, or do you see one being more impacted by the other?
Maybe let me touch a little bit about this anxiety about AI replacing it, because this is really a topic very close to my heart. And I cannot imagine that AI seriously replaces people. I heard the phrase the other day that you will not be put out of job because of AI, but maybe by someone who can deal with AI better than you do. And I think to me, and I also heard we have had this Women of Tech conference earlier this year in June, where AI obviously was the hot topic. And I think also here a couple of analogies came up. And I very much like that analogy of using AI as a calculator, right? So we of course have to do sometimes complicated calculations, and the calculator helps us, but it doesn't make a decision for us. It gives in this case, it gives us a number, but we still have to deal with that number. And I think that for overall, people should not be afraid. I just can really encourage everyone, go out in the internet, take one of the open generative AI tools that are there, whether this is ChatGPT, whether this is DALL-E, whether this is Atesia, create your own avatar for videos. It's quite fun to train it actually. A friend of mine did some beautiful birthday cards with DALL-E, so also experiment on that. To use ChatGPT, for example, now it's vacation time coming up, so we've used it last year to create a plan for our vacation. And this is a good example, right? We said, okay, we're going there, we're a group of this and this, the interests are that and that. What would you recommend? How would you draw out the 2-week vacation in there, right? But then, and this is the beauty of it, it didn't put anyone out of place, because I didn't have anyone like that planning my vacation. Of course, usually it's my husband or it's me. So it gives us a hint. And second, we don't follow this plan, of course, day by day. Of course not, right? It's just a recommendation. And I think this is a lot how we have to see AI as a helper, as somebody recommending, as a first draft. For example, I often translate emails with ChatGPT if it's in a private context mainly, right? So with non-confidential information. And you translate that, but you barely can use it one-on-one. You still need to look over it a minute or two to just fix some things, or they didn't understand the names correct or whatever. So, but it reduces my time to formulate this email from maybe 8 minutes to only 1 minute proofreading. And I think this is where we're going to see a lot of AI. So I have now the remaining 7 minutes to do something else, to grab a coffee or to write the next email. So I think it's not so much that we will run out of job, but our productivity will increase. And honestly speaking, especially in Europe, and it's also especially in Germany, the productivity increase on this service side is so important for us to stay competitive. So I don't think that we're going to let go of people because of AI will replace their job. Totally the opposite. I think the people that have some ideas how they can use AI to increase and boost their creativity, that will be the ones that will definitely stay in the jobs, in my point of view. So, and I think that, as you mentioned it earlier, it's so easy to really experiment with it. You need no certificate, you don't need a test, you can just get started. And therefore, I really would like to encourage you, block an hour or two in your calendar and play around with it a little bit. And if you don't know how to get started, look at a YouTube video. It's really nothing to be afraid of, because it really comes natural.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a journalist, I'm definitely at risk for being replaced by ChatGPT. I mean, I am personally not afraid, but I do have a lot of colleagues that I think need to skill up, right? And as the market is very competitive, I will definitely be replaced by someone who isn't using it, because I won't be fast enough and I might miss stuff, right? It is such a great tool that does make me faster, and I think ultimately better, but it relies on like my skills and my background. It just kind of supercharges me. So like personally, I also can't say enough great stuff about AI. But we are running to an end, and I am going to ask one sneaky question, because I am curious, right? Bosch is a big company that's definitely attracting a lot of talent, and all organizations in all sectors are going after strong female STEM talent. So how are you trying to get more women into automotive specifically?
We're doing it on various things. For example, we're trying to promote Bosch as a company more in the relevant platforms, because I think typical for the automotive supplier industry, they're not so visible, right? I mean, fortunately, we have the household appliance sector, so the brand Bosch is known. But we engage in, for example, in the Women Automotive Network. This is one activity where we want to promote Bosch as a company. We engage with high schools, with universities. We are offering, colleagues of mine are teaching there, but we're also offering a lot of internships, trying to encourage people at a very early stage. Then we're also trying to promote our women, for example, I've initiated a campaign that's called Show to Grow, where we also show our talents to the outside world and say, hey, we have very wonderful, cool women, come on, join us. I mean, so to really also display what we already have, because I think for women, it's also, at least in my perspective and what I'm hearing, it's also important that they see that it's feasible to be there, that they're not the only one, that there's a community around it, that people are appreciated. So these are just a couple of examples how we're reaching out to women.
And so within the Bosch organization, so there often is a need for the organization to kind of empower women and have, a framework in place for whether it's employee training or leadership accountability or like a defining of core values, or like a shifting of cultural norms within an organization, which at Bosch's scale, I could imagine would be kind of challenging. So how is Bosch ensuring that this is a workplace where women can thrive?
Also here to various things. On the one hand, we have a couple of associate networks, for example, called Women in Tech or Global Female Leaders, where we're trying to build a community around these people that they see they can exchange, they can strive for each other. The second thing is that we're very strongly looking for mentorship. And I really believe in that to help women grow. And I think then every leader can do his or her part also on this. For example, in my team, we've initiated something called Lead Like a Headhunter, where we're especially looking at our talents and try to take the look as if we would be headhunters, what would we do with that person? Where do we want to grow that person? Where do we see an extra role for them? But also to get in dialogue with them, to ask them what they want and how we want to bring them forward in their role. So also being in dialogue and understand what they really want, and especially I find with women, often it needs the extra push, and not only with women, but also with everybody who's out of the mainstream, whatever mainstream that is in that company. But this, due to a lack of sense of belonging sometimes, you really need to give this extra push and this extra encouragement. And very often it just helps to convey to the people that you believe in them. I mean, of course, it has to be authentic. You just cannot write it in a postcard and send it everywhere, right? But if you really believe it, encourage them and address their fears and get in touch with them, and also give them examples that they see where others made it, right? So that it's not a mission impossible. And I think this is something that every leader can do.
And I'm going to ask a little bit of a personal question. I hope that's okay. So how many mentors do you have?
I would say I have at the moment one official one, but I have at least 3 unofficial ones that even don't know that I consider them as mentors. And this is how I always approached it. You might have the official ones, but to be quite frank, the official ones I usually found the least helpful. So the most helpful were people that I could identify with, that I had the feeling I had a connection with, and that sometimes I would ask them to be a mentor. Sometimes I would just reach out to them every once in a while, ask them for an advice, ask them for a conversation. And my experience is that very often these people are helpful to share the knowledge. I mean, for example, I also have, I think, 3 or 4 mentees at the moment. So of course,
like official or unofficial.
I think also here again, it's 1 official, and I think it's 3 unofficial ones. So but we would call each other mentor and mentees, right? So it's a semi-official way. But I think it's also I'm thinking many of them don't have to go through the same swamp that I did. And often I don't have the answers, but maybe you give them an impulse or that encouragement, whatever it is. So I really strongly believe in these mentorship relationships for growth.
I mean, me as well. I probably have like 6 unofficial mentorship relationships, and I think now no official mentor relationship, actually, because I think I've come to the same conclusion that you have. It's just you kind of make a connection with somebody, and then they just want to help you, right? So I think sometimes when you like look at mentor mentee, like I think people get a little bit intimidated, but then really it's actually just like finding someone who you can like call to ask, advice from at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, as you also weren't always in the automotive industry, me as well. I came from tech into automotive in terms of journalistic coverage. And when I made the move 10 years ago, I was a little bit surprised about how far behind automotive was. So like in terms of industry, it's where tech was, I would say, maybe 20 years ago, or maybe 15. And you also have a varied background. So when you first came into automotive, what were some of your like most helpful things that you figured out to kind of move through what like was a very male dominated industry and still relatively is?
I have to say that when I started in automotive, I started a little bit in the automotive light area of urban mobility. So this was an area where I could still bring in a lot of this consumer goods and investment goods know that I had from my previous experiences. Second, it was also an area where the foundation was not set yet, right? There was a lot of greenfield where you could still experiment, where you could still kind of define and make the rules instead of having to comply with all the rules. And I think this is something that is throughout my career, the areas where I'm more looking at to say, okay, instead of trying to find out in 12 months what were all the rules that I have to comply with, rather to go into areas that are transformative or that are up for new things where you can also help to shape them towards that. So I think it took me a while to learn also the structure of the market. And I was wondering, why are there so many things that are specific to the automotive? Why are they doing always the extra thing just for them? But then I learned that due to the structure of the market, it's an oligopoly, right? Everybody knows everyone. You have a handful of car manufacturers, you have a handful of car suppliers, and forgive me, I'm generalizing right now. It's a little bit black and white, and the reality is more gray, of course. But it's a real different industry. So also it's very technical oriented, and I think what we're seeing now that this industry, fortunately, is really disrupted. On the one hand, coming up like strong players like Tesla. If you're a fan of Tesla or not, doesn't matter, but they really revolutionized, and what everybody said is impossible, they just came along and did it. On the other hand, China is going the same direction as it, questioning this paradigm of this is impossible, just coming in and not sticking to all the rules that they have set up. And all of a sudden, this industry is shaking. And as you said earlier, I just can fully relate to that. It's really a fun industry to be in at the moment because there's so much to shape. There's so much to bring in experience from other sectors, to bring in learning. In my particular case, for example, it's this whole customer orientation. If you don't have something where you really get all the requirements defined, but you have to really think proactively, what would a customer want? Trying to abstract this to one solution that you have to serve of an anonymous customer. So I think this is something, or also the speed or the iterative trying out of things. And this is where the sweet spot comes now in, also with a switch from rather hardware to more software and digital oriented business, also in the automotive industry, where this iterative approaches are much easier. And coming back to our starting point of the organization, why this agile really makes sense, because you have in that much faster, more iterative development cycles. And I think this really applies very strongly for that part of the automotive industry where software is the competitive differentiating part and not so much hardware anymore.
How are you? Are you finding that people are finally starting to realize that? Because I know that is true. Like it's correct. But then when I have conversations with middle management inside of the automotive industry, I'm still shocked that I like meet a lot of resistance. I mean, like, unfortunately, I think the automotive industry does have a lot of like gearheads, and like I also am stereotyping as well and like broad generalization, but you know, you don't work at a performance car company if you don't love performance cars in general, right? So I still find that I'm met with resistance to this idea that digital is the driving factor for the future. Are you running into that at all, or are you seeing that like in everyone that you're dealing with, everyone's a lot more open-minded and actually doing the work?
I find all kinds of perspectives on that. I think we have on the one hand the people that are working more in digital, that have an imagination what digital can do and that are fully focused on the digital. And then you have people that have for decades worked on this hardware and know how to do perfect gears or perfect chassis systems and are very much into hardware. And, I think the magic is about not banishing either one of them. So what I'm trying to build the bridge, because there's one thing is for sure, you will not be able to run a car without proper, good, solid, high quality hardware. It's going to be impossible. The other thing is that you're also not going to run a car only on the digital. So you have to combine these two. And I think this will be, to me, the succeeding leader that understand both sides and that understand how to orchestrate them, right? That are acting like a conductor of an orchestra where you have all kinds of different expertise. And it's rather about bringing them together instead of trying to convince one that it's bad and now the other one is new. So coming back to this, we need a little bit less dogmatism and a little bit more openness in how we can orchestrate that both. And I think for that, really empathy is needed. You need to listen and you need to understand where they are coming from. And sometimes you need to push people a little bit into the cold water, but still make sure that you tell them that you're waiting outside on the shore. So you are there ready to get them, but nevertheless, they have to try to swim themselves a little bit in the cold water. So it's exactly that you need to guide people, yet also push them. And I think it's a fine balance where to do that rightly. And yeah, I think that, as I said, I think the difficulty at the moment is also coming more from an industry perspective, that all of this new mobility, whether it's electric, whether it's hydrogen, whether it's data-driven, whether it's software features, it also has a high amount of investments that need to be done. And sometimes the investment cannot be carried by one company or by two companies, but really it has to be also an investment in the infrastructure and everything around. And I think there we still see that we're putting every once in a while unintentionally the brakes on if one of the ecosystem players is not acting in a supportive way. And I think that we have to really watch out that we're stay in sync on our way forward to make sure we're ready for the future and not so much falling back into old habits and into sentences like "I told you" that won't work. So rather push forward instead of trying to fix the old stuff.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think a lot of the issues that are happening today with automotive journalism, there's a lot of finger pointing and a focusing on the negative and a weird obsession with talking about China when, like, we all know that it's already happening for quite some number of years right now. Right? But I think that that's a really good kind of place to end on it, that we need to build this bridge between the two sides. And I think that women are some of the best managers that I think are missing in automotive right now. So that to me is where I hope to see a lot more women in automotive, and of course in STEM, because that's really important. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today. I found your discussion really insightful, and I learned actually a lot about the way that Bosch approaches Agile business networks.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Nicole.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.